She is director of the Environmental Science Division at Argonne, an agronomist and an expert on climate change. Very aware of what's happening, and the pace of change has dramatically increased in the last 6 months, at least in the United States. So we're happy to have her. And Dr. David Tillman, he's the Regents Professor and McKnight Presidential Chair in Ecology at University of Minnesota, also a distinguished professor at the Brent School of Environmental Science and Management in Santa Barbara. If you look at his interesting bio, he has a love for both math and biology, which might be a little bit unusual. His work explores how both natural and managed ecosystems can be used to meet the needs of humans, whether it be for food, energy, or ecosystem services. He has a number of awards, including the Robert MacArthur Award, Alexander von Humboldt Medal, the BBVA Foundation Frontiers of Knowledge Award. He's a member of both the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Academy of Sciences, and was recently elected as a foreign member of the Royal Society. So quite a distinguished background. Thanks, David, for being here. And we have Dr., and I may mispronounce this, Vidya Venkatramnen. I hope I came close. Her PhD is from the Gilling School of Global Public Health in Chapel Hill. She's now a postdoctoral fellow in anthropology and the Center for Water Research at Northwestern University, Evanston. She's interested in how community engagement and participation can improve the implementation of water sanitation for hygiene and environmental sustainability programs, drawing on tools from both policy and implementation research. So that's our panel. It's going to be very interactive. I would encourage all the fellows, please do use the chat. I will begin moderating, and as Thomas mentioned, he'll take over a bit later. Might ask each of the panelists in turn to introduce themselves, what they think is interesting, either about themselves or about the field, where the field is going, and that may trigger some questions from the fellows. So why don't we start with Cristina? Would you start, and then we'll go from there, and then David, and then Vidya.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me to this. Thank you, George and Thomas, and it's great to be with you today. I'll start saying a couple of words about myself, and then I will tell you a little bit about my research and actually more broadly the role I cover and what we do in the group I lead. So I'm an agronomist. I'm originally from Italy, so all my degrees have happened over there. And so I came to this country mostly because my husband was here. And so to me, the challenge was to come over with no pedigree, if you will, because I didn't come here to study. So I didn't have a school to transition from, to transition in this community. But I had been working in Italy, and I was lucky enough to meet with folks from Argonne early on, and that provided a fantastic path to research. With that, what I like about working at the National Lab is this ability to work through the most challenging issues and being so plugged into where decisions are made as far as policy goes, or really addressing the biggest problem in the world. As George said, I'm an agronomist, so I study crop science, but I've always looked at the environmental aspects of it. So I started working on, my first job in Argonne was to look at plutonium transfer from soils to plant to support remediation and reclamation of different lands near a DOE facility that worked with plutonium. And through that, I've seen the whole suite of different kinds of environmental problems sweeping the world in a sense, right? So I started, sad to say because that shows how old I am, but started when Italy was starting the equivalent of the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act legislation. So the deal there was, what do we do with waste? And the concept that waste is not a waste if you can use it again, right? So it's only waste if you discard it, right? And And so that concept of reuse and recycle and circular economy was actually there in the 80s, mid 80s, and so on, which I found interesting because it's a topic that keeps coming along, right? It's over there. So through that, watching, environmental and agricultural science go through the decades was really an incredible perspective. Currently, my own research has to do with bioenergy, because I'm funded by the DOE Office of Bioenergy Technologies Office. And so what I'm doing with that office is really finding ways to incorporate new crops and bioenergy systems into a working agricultural landscape, so that we don't get into natural other type of land, which is not agricultural land, that we make best use of land that is not used optimally, like marginal land or environmentally degraded land or environmentally marginal land that is subject to flooding, to erosion and things like that. And so the central key hypothesis in there is that if you use this land, you can not only produce the biomass that's needed, but you can also provide positive change into the environment, right? And creation of ecosystem services such as water quality, such as wildlife habitat, pollinator habitat, other things. And that is really what we start talking about as responsible innovation. In other words, taking a look at what we create as innovation and thinking of how that will perform, and on a broader perspective, how that will be through its life cycle, be responsive to the needs not only of what it is meant to do, but broadly the environment. So in that sense, how do we use our land? We have a new system coming in, which is bioenergy. How do you make it compatible and possibly even, in concert with other agricultural systems to make the whole better than the sum of its parts? So that is one piece. I've actually been working now with my colleagues who do climate change to see if these different kind of bioenergy systems based on landscape positions and landscape features is also a better way to think about another ecosystem services. I call it ecosystem services, but it may be, slightly different, which is climate adaptation and resilience. In other words, if you bet on a diversified landscape, which is different kinds of crops, different kind of systems, different kind of business models, right? And creating a environmental entrepreneurship into rural communities, is that are going to be more resilient to climate change. We all know that climate is going to alter how crops are going to be productive. It's going to alter the presence of pests. It's going to alter a lot of the basics on which crops, function and are productive. Can we design a system that's intrinsically resilient to these changes in climate, and so make them more adaptive and a better business model for the people who inhabit these communities. So that is one part of the work we are doing and we are thinking a lot about. The other part is exporting this concept of responsible innovation, is really working with a totally different kind of scientists, people that innovate in plastics, for example, or in other products or things that you can hold in your hands, right? Whether it's a material, a polymer, or something, and say, can we work side by side between chemical engineers, for example, or chemists, or material scientists, and environmental scientists, and data scientists, if you will, computational experts, to find ways to make sure when we develop something that is not going to be coming back and bite us in the decades to come. We all know the example of perfluorinated compounds, the PFAS, PFOA. There are nasty chemicals that are, however, very good in controlling fire. So they are used as fire retardants. And now, after decades of use, are found in a lot of our groundwater and the water sources, and it's a huge liability to remove. Could we have predicted these properties when these products were designed? Probably not, because we were in the 50s and 60s. But now, going forward, can we embed some of that knowledge and use our computational resources and use our knowledge of environmental systems to predict whether these new discoveries are going to be benign to the environment, or should we modify them from the very start so that we build in some breakdown triggers, right? So that we don't have the forever chemicals that we have now, whether they're plastics in the oceans or fire retardants or whatever, you know, innovation will bring. So that's really a call for scientists to work together. The people that work very focused on one topic and understanding the chemistry of a particular product with the system level people that can provide a broader vision of what that problem will do once it's introduced in the consumer society, in the world and industry and ecological environmental systems. So that is my nutshell of what I wanted to bring to you. Is more of a thought than anything else, but I think it's really the grand challenges that we have as innovators, as people who think about science and what science can do for humans. With that,
thank you, Cristina. Yeah, wonderful. David, would you like to introduce yourself and tell what you think is most important?
Sure. David Tillman. I'm a professor of ecology. And I started my career, I hate to say it, but it was 50 years ago right now, doing research in Costa Rica, a long time ago for most of you. And the world has changed immensely since I started that work. At that time, ecology was the study of nature. And in the 50 years since then, humans have become so abundant, but also so rich. Each of us now has about 10 times the buying power that we had about 80 years ago. And so twice as many people, 10 times the buying power. We are the dominant force affecting everything that happens on Earth. And almost any action we have has many unexpected impacts, just as Cristina has been suggesting happened. People who invented chemicals that were flame retardants never imagined they would pollute water and cause cancer 50 years later. So basically, you are now scholars in an era where there are an incredible number of linked interactions that are the result of any given human action. I'll explain mine and let you sort of see the picture. I was first intrigued by why the world had so many species. Why did Earth come to have 5 million different species of plants and animals living on it? And then I wondered whether human actions that were causing loss of diversity, extinctions, and simplifying habitats might actually matter. Did it matter if we lost species? Did they really affect humans? Or was it just the love of nature that might make you want to preserve them? And we found out in that research that of all the variables ecologists had ever studied that impacted how a given ecosystem might function, often the most important variable was how many species were in that ecosystem. That losing diversity from systems, which we've been causing for many reasons, was potentially going to threaten the services those ecosystems might be able to provide us, not just now, but 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years into the future of humanity. And these would be basically irreversible losses. It was also then clear as I did this work that the single greatest cause of loss of diversity on Earth was agriculture, especially land clearing for agriculture, as well as agricultural pollution of water. And then I wondered, well, what drove agriculture, including agriculture? Farmers grow crops that people want to eat. And so human diets were a big cause of what was going on in agriculture. And it turns out human diets are also a big cause of what is now recognized as a global epidemic of non-communicable diseases that are lifestyle diseases caused mainly by what we eat. So here I started out being an ecologist, and I had to start studying agriculture, and then I had to start studying nutrition. And I did this not on my own, but by collaborating with people in all these areas. At the same time, economists were drawn into these discussions. So economists, social scientists, nutritionists, public health people agronomists, and so on, are now part of a large sort of loose team of people with whom I collaborate, trying to find ways that we can live more sustainably, live in a way in which future generations are going to have the right to have a life at least as good and hopefully better that we've been privileged to live on this earth. So that's sort of what I do. It's an amazing challenge. It's fun. It's exciting. And it's sometimes a bit disturbing and frightening to realize that probably the greatest issue we all face is our inability for lack of knowledge or lack of willingness to change our behaviors in ways that really ultimately are better for us and better for the next generation of humans on Earth, better for all the other species on Earth. This really comes down to lots of choices we make. How do we get our energy? How do we get our food? How is it produced? What things do we decide to eat? How do our actions impact the water that we all need? How does it impact the long-term livability of the Earth, climate change, and so on? Agriculture is a major cause of climate change. 30% of greenhouse gases come from agriculture, broadly defined, 30%. And agriculture just by itself, if we quit burning fossil fuels today, agriculture by itself would cause the world to exceed the Paris Accord 2-degree limit before the end of this century. This comes from a paper that a student of mine and my colleagues and I had in Science last year. So we face an incredible number of interlinked problems. And it turns out that the solutions really come down to what we decide to consume and how the products that we consume are being produced. And so I have no doubt that we can solve all the problems I've mentioned, all the ones that we really face. But to do so is going to have only occur when we realize how these are linked and when we realize how the decisions each of us makes as individuals and that we make as a whole society influence the future of humanity and the future livability of the Earth.
Great summary. Thank you, David. I already see a couple of questions coming up. That's fantastic. Vidya, would you like to make a few introductory comments?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks everyone for being here today. So my name is Vidya Venkatramnen, and I am what I call an environmental social scientist. And I really liked what David just said about, all of these issues around if we just sort of understand, if we realize the linkages between all of these different factors and then the willingness to change. But one thing I'll add, it's an and, is that it ties into really my area of interest in my work is trying to understand why people behave the way they do and what might be all of those reasons that determine their decision making. So taking one step before behavior change and really understanding behavior itself. So my background is a little bit different here in that I started in public health. So I have a bachelor's in international development and then a master's in public health. And I used to focus on infectious diseases like TB, HIV, mosquito-borne diseases, which brought me slowly towards the environmental space through water and sanitation, which I was originally looking at primarily from a human health angle. How can we improve access to rural sanitation in order to improve public health? But through that work that I was doing, I slowly started to realize that there's public health is a piece of it, right? Poor access to water and sanitation leads to an increase in waterborne diseases, which then leads to public health challenges. But there's another piece here that we're not really thinking about, we're not really looking at, is what is causing people to either use a toilet, not use a toilet in rural settings where I was working. What might be other reasons, what might be other priorities that people have that are causing them to either choose not to use a toilet or really just not have the option of using a toilet, which made me start thinking about this from a broader perspective of behavior. What brought me into squarely much more into the environmental realm is this link through water, where the work that I currently do is relates to flooding. And again, water and sanitation, but much more squarely with flooding. And I am currently based in Evanston, Illinois, which is just north of Chicago. And Chicago is a city that is right by one of the huge Great Lakes, Lake Michigan. And we have a lot of urban flooding issues because of old aging infrastructure. So I work primarily with the Nature Conservancy, which is one of the largest conservation organizations in the world that has been thinking about preserving green spaces, that has been working to preserve green spaces purely from that point of, for the love of nature, right? We just want to conserve nature. But they've started to realize, as David said, ecology is not just about studying nature, but we humans are such a huge component of this. They've started to say, well, how do we engage people in the process of nature? That's where someone like me comes in, who's saying, well, I know how to talk to people. I know how to understand people's priorities and their concerns. How do we link this up? But I'm a hippy dippy person. As I say, I love preserve, I care about nature. I care about reducing waste. I care about all of these things. And so it's been a really nice marrying of these two concepts of being able to talk to folks who are living in spaces in Chicago, in urban Chicagoland, who are around native green spaces, but don't necessarily engage with them because they have other priorities. So how do we link this together? So that's been a lot of the work that I've been doing here, is helping the Nature Conservancy connect with people, engage with communities in a meaningful way. One of the things I want to put out there as a result of the work I've been doing is really trying to dig into this concept, and I'd love to chat about that more this morning with all of you, is what does that mean when we're talking about engaging with communities, especially those who are typically left out of the conversation? To put it simply, in my context here, it is largely communities of color who are left out of both the environmental conversation and also the urban development conversation. So how do we actually, but what does it mean to engage? Is it just going and having a couple of conversations and saying, oh, we spoke to them, so now we can do what we want? Or is it actually a much more involved process of really bringing people in? So I really want to kind of get into that a little bit. And now you're catching me actually at a transition point in my career, where in the next month, I will be starting at the US Agency for International Development, working on on ocean plastic pollution with the Green Cities Division. And again, this is an area of, well, we have all these folks that are working on, say, when it comes to the production cycle, as Cristina was talking about with plastics, we have folks who are working on municipal waste management. We have all of our wonderful environmentalists that are working on actually cleaning up the oceans. But there's something missing there. What about all of us people that are in the middle of this? So my goal here, ambitious goal, is to try to address some of this, bring people together and try to understand again, what are the priorities of all these different groups? And how can we actually marry those together and realize that it's not actually, obviously not a simple solution, but how can we optimize to the extent possible the different needs that different groups have to address our end outcome, which is, in this case, reducing plastic pollution. So I'm really excited to chat with all of you about this.
Great, thank you, Vidya. That is terrific, and thanks to all three of you. I see some questions in the chat. Let me ask though, David, if I can, and anyone please answer, but I'll start, David, with you if you don't mind. You talked about agriculture putting us over the 2-degree limit, just agriculture alone. So here's the question. Can we feed the human population without emitting carbon dioxide?
In an absolute sense, I think no. But we can feed the world with much lower, much more acceptable emissions of carbon dioxide. And in the long term, we might be able to go closer to zero with renewable energy sources. So in the really long term, if we could power all of agriculture, if we could produce all the agrochemicals that are needed to do it, many of which are currently overused, I will say, but the actual amount needed. And if we can increase yields in poor countries that currently don't have modern technology and have very low yields, and by doing that, not have to clear any more land, with all those ifs, we could probably make agriculture be carbon neutral. But it'll also mean not eating very much meat, because it's very hard right now to get rid of the methane emissions from ruminants. And it takes an awful lot of grain to produce each kilogram of edible animal meat that we produce as livestock. So there are lots of ifs. If we change our diets, if we change many other things, we could be pretty close to neutral. And if we really did it well, with a big change in diets, we could abandon some cropland, plant it with forest and store carbon. And we might even be able to make the total net current agricultural land base be carbon negative and absorb some carbon for us. But those are huge changes. So yes, in a dream world, I think we could do it all. What we really might do, I think, is not going to get us down to zero emissions.
Yeah, really interesting answer. Other panelists, Vidya, Cristina, any comments?
I think my comment about agriculture, again, it's the trick in all this is also understanding our endpoints and understanding how we can combine the decarbonization of agriculture with other endpoints. Can we do it in a way that doesn't trigger other negative impacts, right? And how all of these are connected, right? So there's a lot of discussion these days about anything from, growing vegetables in a greenhouse and hydroponic, or creating the impossible burger, right? And what that means. All of those are good and well, but depending on, the ultimate goal, they may not really be solutions, right? And but the world is thinking a lot about these things, and and David himself has done a lot of work in really trying to understand, really saying beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So what are you looking for? Are you looking for a decrease in greenhouse gases, or are you looking for a decrease in the land footprint of crops? Are you looking for environmental impacts? Are you looking for more wholesome products to feed people with, right? And all of them may be different. So it's a tricky question, and I think part of sustainability leadership is really to figure out that there's a lot of huge questions and try to optimize the decisions towards what creates, where we want to go.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, not having a background in the agricultural side, but just thinking about water use. So again, what are your endpoints here? So if 90% of water in the world is used towards agriculture, then we need to also think, are we trying to conserve, water? Are we trying to come up with more innovative ways of recycling water? And I think just like what you're saying, Cristina, are there ways of trying to also think about, if we can't necessarily tackle this just from the way that we produce agriculture, then what are the other sort of externalities that we can target instead that might get us towards lowering carbon emissions? And also recognizing that there is this is something that we say all the time, but there's no one solution, right? And so how do you have these context specific solutions, and how do we learn from places where it's working and apply them in other contexts? That's something that I don't think we do enough in I would say in every realm. We always talk about scaling up a solution that works in one place, but it's recognizing that that's not really a thing you can do.
Great answers. I see a question. Oh yes, comment from someone? If not, I see a question from Sebastian. And I'm thinking, Sebastian, your first comment, yeah, I'll read it, but please chime in. If food waste was a country, it would be third place after China and the USA in terms of carbon emissions. Is that, Sebastian, you want to expand on that a bit?
Yeah, so the whole point here was, wait, hold on, where was the source? Food Waste Index 2021 UNEP, and it had like a food waste per capita across countries that was just released like a couple days ago. And in that, they mentioned that if food waste was a country, it would be third place after the USA and China in terms of carbon emission, as George just mentioned. So like, would it be, I think what I'm trying to say is we could reduce our carbon emissions greatly while still feeding all of humanity if we just create a more efficient food system. Like I know in the US, a lot of produce is thrown away because it's ugly, but it's still perfectly viable for like human consumption. So I don't know what you guys have like thoughts about that or any comments.
Well, I'll jump in. Clearly, reducing food waste would be a very important thing to do. And there are programs in place, for instance, in China, national programs trying to reduce food waste. They're probably one of the more advanced countries trying to do this right now. The problems are all along the supply chain. In lower income countries, much of the food waste happens because the farmers don't have the right equipment to harvest and to store crops and to move them safely to markets. Those tend not to be significant problems in the high income countries, where most of the waste happens from the grocery store through the consumer. And there, part of it is packaging, part is knowledge, part is probably a little bit of laziness. For many people, the cost of food is a relatively minor part of their budget. And so if they waste it, they don't feel very bad about it. And actually, most people don't tend to waste the most expensive foods they buy. Meat has a lower wastage weight than other things. So but you're right, it could go a long way toward helping the problem. Another thing I didn't mention, which sort of Christine sort of briefly hinted at, and that is there are some really clear win-wins right now. Foods in general are healthier for you, are in fact also much better for the environment, which really means the foods that are not healthy for you tend to be red meats, processed red meats. Those are the absolute worst things. And those are also things which have cause the greatest environmental harm. And so a shift toward healthier diets actually has a huge benefit. And in fact, its benefit is larger when you look at all the numbers. If the whole world shifted to something comparable to sort of a Mediterranean diet, which is mainly vegetable based, but with bits of meat, fish and other meat, that actually reduces greenhouse gas emissions more than getting rid of all waste. But doing both of them part way would give huge advantages.
Great answer. More comments from the panel? Vidya or Cristina? Let's see. Utsavi, you had an interesting question about agrarian, usually developing countries where farmers are mostly uneducated. How can you get them to change their ways? How do you go about that? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
I might just jump in quickly on it. Again, not coming from the agricultural side of things, but being someone who has grown up in the developing, quote unquote, developing world. I think it may not be a fair statement to say that they're uneducated and therefore need education to change their ways. I think there are a lot of larger structural factors that have led to a change in their agricultural practices that would need to be addressed more so. I'm thinking specifically from some of the work that I've done in the past when it comes to, let's say, India and Monsanto as being one of the largest companies, that the way that they spread their seeds and marketed their seeds when it comes to BT cotton or BT brinjal and all these different types of mass-produced crops, the way that they marketed their seeds led to a change in the agricultural practices for farmers that led to them requiring those seeds over and over, that led to them therefore falling into debt, committing suicide as a result of droughts and these ruthless practices. That isn't actually has anything to do with the farmer's education level or the farmer's desired practices, right? So I think we need to just sort of talk a little bit more about structural factors that lead to different decisions and maybe trying to understand what are ways. I've seen many instances through case studies of farms that I've gone to in India or of agroecological practices that are taking place in Eastern Africa, where you actually harness the existing knowledge of farming practices and then try to bring those back in, try to reintroduce those again so that people can have sustainable practices. That requires, though, a shift in these larger structural factors and not in individual farmers, if that makes sense. That's just my little take on it.
You're raising an issue we've talked about a lot in SISE this year, and that is, broadly put, can capitalism solve climate change? And there are some conflicts, which I think you've just pointed out one of them. Interested panelists, anything else you'd like to add to that?
Well, I think the only hope for capitalism changing climate change is if capitalism has strong top-down governmental regulation.
I would say that, yeah, I agree, David. I think that there's an intrinsic concern with capitalism is that it's really based on profit making and individual solutions. And I fear that the world is way too complex for that alone to be a driver of change. In other words, we need to start thinking about it like a community and not as individual capitalist entity, right? And so that's a global issue. I think there could be opportunities, and I think people are always trying to promote the business side of of change, right? And so could climate change be an opportunity for a new kind of industry? And that is very important, right? We need that. But overall, I totally agree that there's got to be some regulation and some common practices and some mutual agreements to make sure that we protect the world entirely, right? And with that, the communities that make the whole world and not just a few privileged ones.
Great comment. And
If I could
well,
jump
please.
in again. I think that for a government to impose restrictions on their economy that help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and so on, I think there has to be an international understanding about equity on a per capita basis, that each person around the world is just as important as every other person. It can't be rich countries telling poor countries, don't do what we did, don't have massive greenhouse gas emissions, and unless we, in fact, lead the way by showing how we can reduce our emissions down to some level. Ultimately, agreements only work when all the parties feel like they're being treated equally. And that has to be true for governments around the world. And right now, I think that's been one of the big causes of hesitation. Why should I hurt myself as a country when no other country is doing it or other ones aren't also doing it? So we have to overcome that kind of an issue internationally. And I think that's going to take the richer countries recognizing that right now we are consuming too much and doing too much, if you will. Maybe we're not consuming too much, we're consuming too much of the wrong products. We need to change. And we can't expect other countries to follow suit until we, the ones who are the biggest cause of the problem on a per capita basis, actually change.
Yeah, and that's a big perspective. I think you get a lot of agreement on that. The question is how to get there.
Right, yeah.
Which is a bit of a challenge. Yeah. Other comments? Panelists?
I would just add to what David said, though, about, yes, there is absolutely no doubt, of course, that the richer countries in the world are consuming way too much of the wrong thing. But straddling that world between the rich countries and then the developing countries, I would say that it also takes countries that are rising up on the income level to realize that by just saying that, hey, you guys didn't do it this way, so why do we have to start making these changes, is such a short-sighted response as well. I understand the response, but it's very short-sighted for their own citizens' well-being, right? So it requires a change also, a recognition amongst those countries to say, well, just because you guys did it that way doesn't mean we have to follow suit. We can actually take charge. And you can see, I think there are some examples here and there, few and far between, of countries, though, especially those that are at the forefront of dealing with sea level rise, that are coming up saying, no, we have to do something now because we are drowning.
Yeah, great point. Adele, you had a question back in the beginning and you had directed to Vidya, but I think would be good for everyone. Do you want to, it had to do with Kimberly Miner, our keynote speaker. Do you want to say that question?
Yeah, thank you so much, all three of you, for your great presentation. My question was related to communities, and we had our keynote speaker, Dr. Kimberly Miner. She mentioned that we protect what we love, and mentioning that in context of the environment and the natural world. So I was curious in your work, in your field work with communities, kind of being at the front lines, how do you facilitate this love and appreciation for the natural world in these different areas?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's one thing that I have learned from working with my partners at the Nature Conservancy is who think about community engagement as well as environmental conservation, is to start from the standpoint, especially when we're working with communities, and I'm putting all of this in quotes because we require definitions for all of this, but working with communities who we might think are not as appreciative, in quotes, of nature or of the outdoors, just not start with that starting point. Start with the point of like, well, no, we all have this appreciation, latent or evident. And so how do we better understand that? And one of the ways that we do that is, so, for example, when I'm doing surveys, is not to say, what are the reasons that you don't engage with nature, right? It is to say, what do you like about nature? How do you define nature? What does it mean to you? What do you try to do outdoors? How much time do you spend outdoors? It's really trying to first understand where people are at, meet people where they're at. And then realize through conversations, it requires I do a lot of qualitative work, is what we say. So we do interviews and focus group discussions, and we take photos, and it's very anthropological, but it's to actually have people, invite them into a conversation, and slowly people start to realize just how much it is that they actually do engage. So whether it's a potted, I'm coming into a very micro scale here, but whether it's a potted plant in your house, or spending time just outside listening to the birds, or going and hiking in a national park. Those can all be different ways that you engage with nature, but you may not think about it until you start engaging in that conversation. So often I have this happen where, whether I'm talking to an 18-year-old or a 70-year-old, through that conversation, they go, oh yeah, oh wait, I do like this. I didn't even realize I do. This does matter to me. I didn't realize it does. Or getting back into your in the conversation, into realizing that, and I'm saying this as a person of color coming from a certain background, talking to another person of color coming from a different background, we can still engage with the fact that even though right now our people aren't seen as the people that are going out and hiking in the national park, we are the kind that have an ancestral tradition of engaging with nature, of being in nature, of what that means to us, and bringing that back out can also help us see what we have in front of us. So it's not a simple answer, but it is, to me, this always comes down to time and relationships. And that's the way that you really get in. It's not a one-time thing. It's not transactional. It's really just getting to know and slowly bringing that out of people.
Comments from David or Cristina?
Well, I love your question, Adele, and picking up on the comment. When I teach a class on the ecology of humanity, our last discussion, I always started by asking, what's going to change the world? Will it be love or money? And my personal answer is love. We really do save the things we love. And I have us talk about what we love, and many people love nature. Other people really sort of love the heritage of their family. They love thinking about the future. That they themselves as students may sometime have children and grandchildren and so on, and they want to give them an earth as good as the earth they have right now. So I personally think that the deepest motivation that all of us have as humans is really out of love for ourselves, love for other people, love for family, and so on. And now that there are so many of us doing so much, what we decide really impacts all of those things. And we can have the impact be positive or negative. So I think with that kind of knowledge, we really can affect change.
Great comment.
Yeah, I would like to add one thing going forward, though, and that's the role of education. I have been thinking that, generally speaking, and I think we've seen it in the last year and a half, people really don't like a couple of things. They don't like complexity, and they don't like uncertainty, right? Generally at large. And if there's two things that characterize the environment, is those two words, right? Uncertainty and complexity, right? And And in my mind, I think what we really need is it's a strong effort at the K-12 education level to really make part of the literacy of new citizens, new people, really learning how this complexity impacts us and how this uncertainty that we have in understanding these systems impacts us. In other words, our relationship as humans with the environment where we are in is an important piece, but nobody really learns in school how important that is. And so my point is that environment should actually be taught in elementary school and make it fundamental just as much as math and reading and all those other things, because it's really the same, the way of how we interact with what's around us. And so I don't know where and how to make that happen, but right now the concept that you do environmental study is such an optional and almost like cute thing to do in a sense, or interesting thing to do on the side. It doesn't really convey the necessity and the importance of all these themes for each one of them. And then I hope that if we bring these hubs into elementary school, we have two things. One, kids will take it back to their parents, and so begin a broader process of education. And two, maybe we'll have addressed some of these psychology issues in people, because they will have more instruments to understand, yeah, when I flush my toilet, where does that water go, right? And what are the implications of that? When I apply way too much fertilizer, what does that do? When I throw away plastic, what does that do? And knowing that our personal choice is really determinant in a lot of things. And in a sense, yeah, so the work that Vidya is doing is absolutely critical, right? And I've been having these conversations with people with recycling or so, and I'm thinking the moment you have something in the consumer world, it's going to work like non-point source pollution, right? Which is the hardest and toughest thing to do in water treatment, right? Because it's so distributed around, and you have to add that every person is going to be a decision point, right? It's not a pipe coming out of a plant. It's a million little pipes that throw stuff in the environment. And we need to get to a point where everybody is going to think twice in doing this and embed some behaviors from the very start. So that is my thinking. How to make it happen, it's another question, but really elevating environmental science and the science of relationship between us and our environment as a critical literacy issue is going to be an important thing going forward.
And I'll just add, Cristina, I don't think it's even required. I don't think we have a choice, right? Like, right. It has to be. I mean, I will credit a 4th grade teacher who, in the Philippines back, then, who taught me about what global warming was, who had us do something as simple as creating a recycling bin in our house for papers, which of course my parents laughed about, and now they see, oh no, it influenced you for the rest of your life. But that doesn't mean that everyone has to then go into the environmental space. No. It's about realizing how connected it is to every aspect of our lives. And so I think it's just crucial. And the other aspect I'll mention there, though, that again brings it to a local context is, one of the projects I do here is a very local community-based participatory research project that we've been doing on water issues over the past year, right where I live, with local environmental organizations. And one of those folks is a water educator who has taught me not just the importance of doing this kind of work, but also when it comes to K through 12 education, educating young children on environmental issues is grounding it in their own reality. Mm-hmm. So what she realized, this educator who I collaborate with, is that while we might be teaching environmental science, environmental issues, conservation, etc., in the school, we're talking about it as some broad abstract concept. Whereas, for example, where I live, they said, well, Lake Michigan is right here, one of the largest sources of fresh water in the world. And the children don't know that they're 1 mile away from the lake. They don't go there. Their education, their environmental classes aren't conducted at the lake. So she started taking people out there and realizing, where is your water coming from? Like you said, Cristina, when you flush the toilet, where does it go? Taking them to the wastewater treatment plant. Actually connecting it to their immediate lives can make a big difference in then expanding and seeing where you are in the world. So I completely agree. I think sometimes I push back against the idea of just education and awareness. But when it comes to young children, I think it's crucial we just don't have a choice anymore.
So really interesting discussion. I'm thinking that there are two paths forward. One is the educational path and the caring path, the personal interaction path that we've been talking about. The other one is the technological path for getting the, let's take farming, getting the sustainable agriculture machinery and processes out there. And I'm wondering if the panel would weigh in on, well, let me make one more comment. It's a little bit difficult with lots of smallholder farmers, as you may have in the developing world, to roll out that technology. Whereas in, say, the United States, where it's sort of agribusiness, it's a little easier to roll out that kind of technology. Any comments on what's more important, what's more difficult, where we should put our efforts, top priority and things like that?
Well, I will, so a more precise form of agriculture that applies the right amounts of inputs, water, fertilizer, pesticides, and so on at the right time is very important. And it's interesting, some of this technology is just really results from merely communicating knowledge to farmers. And it's just as successful, maybe even more successful with smallholder farmers. For instance, China had a program in which several million farmers joined in, where they were told, based upon a lot of data that has been gathered by agronomists across the country, how much fertilizer to add to particular crops on particular soils in particular regions. And they were given this advice, and it was almost always 20 or 30% less fertilizer than they had been adding. And they were able to maintain, in some cases, actually increase their yields. This was a 10-year experiment with millions of farmers participating in it, with thousands of agriculture outreach personnel going out to the farmers, meeting with them, explaining why this was being done, what it meant, and so on. And it was published in a paper in I believe, Nature a few years ago, the Million Farmer Study in China. It was very successful. Much lower inputs, higher yields, less greenhouse gas emission, less water pollution, and so on. So it doesn't necessarily take really fancy machinery. If you have smallholder farmers, they can just do it on their own farm. On large farms in the United States or other more high-income countries, farmers could do much of what the fancy machine can do just by finding out how much fertilizer they really have to add on average across their land. Most farmers add more than they actually need on average. But the next step is where you do need the technology, the precision technology. That's where you try to add exactly the right amount of a given input to one particular part of a given field. And there you do need more technology. But we are so far away from that around the world in general that just adding the right amount on average for a whole field for a crop on a given soil type is a big advance.
Great comment. Thomas, do you want to take over?
Yes, I will absolutely take over. George is being called away by Department of Energy. So when you
got a call I have to make.
Oh, you can't say no.
Can't say no, right.
And it works for me as well because we're getting close to the end of the panel, and I wanted to bring in one fellow's question, and then I want to tie in a question at the end of that as well. Chaitanya, a while back, you had mentioned that we were talking about sustainability for the past several days, and you were wanting to ask a question about solving issues. Could you phrase that question to the whole panel, and then I want to tack something onto the end of it to round out our conversation?
Definitely. So, I mean, this is more in line with the topic today as well, right? Regarding innovation. I was just wondering that for a while we'd been talking about a lot of sustainability issues. But what wasn't clear was, and we talked about a lot of potential solutions as well, But what wasn't clear was what's actually happening now. Is it happening fast enough? And how fast do we need to be? And then if it's not as fast as we need to be, then what are the innovation issues and things that we can do to get that fast?
And just tying on to that, because I think that's a great question. And I had actually written a question similar to it at the very beginning, and I just want to tie this one in. Can you address that in whatever way you feel is appropriate, both at kind of like at different scales, both from kind of like a big, like, what do we do as a world or as a society, all the way down to what could you charge the fellows in this room, all 33 of them who want to change the world? What could they do at an individual level that maybe we also could learn from and try to do as well to help to help realize that?
I mean, I can try. It's a huge question. I think individually, with pretty sort of common knowledge, we can make decisions about how we use energy and how we procure what things we tend to buy. So we can, if we have to make a decision about some appliance for a house, try to buy an energy efficient appliance. If you're replacing a furnace or refrigerator or whatever it might be, try to find something that's more energy efficient. That's a pretty simple thing. Try to find a more energy efficient way to meet your needs for transport. That's another thing that can be done. And on the food side, adopting a healthier diet where you basically eat less meat, eat the right amount of calories. Many people eat more calories than we need. That's another waste. There are two kinds of waste, and that's the waste that your belt uses to hold up your pants. That's the other kind of waste that gets too big right now, besides the other one. But I mean, those are pretty simple decisions. And those individually can have a significant impact. I think the other thing to do is to share the knowledge that you have in a polite, nice, friendly way with your friends to help them sort of gain some more insight. So whether that's on what you eat or how you use energy in a way without being pushy and so on, but just sort of friendly, nice way explaining why you decided something might encourage them to do the same thing.
Yeah, I agree. I also think as sustainability leaders going forward, really asking the question, to what end am I doing something, right? And knowing that everything is interrelated. And so if you address one end, there will be, nothing comes for free, right? It's there's no such thing as a free lunch. And so understanding what that free lunch would be, whether it's good or bad, it's an important thing. So having in mind that the thing we do should actually, at this point, with limited resources, address more than one need is probably an important consideration to have going forward. And if you are into the sciences and into research, really, I think collaborations and multidisciplinarity that can bring forward this complex system science picture, I think it's absolutely critical. Oh.
And then what I will add to that is, well, Chaitanya, first to answer your question about, are these solutions happening fast enough? In my opinion, no, it's not. There are solutions here and there. It's not happening fast enough. And what it would take, I mean, that's the multi-billion-dollar question, right? But one thing that I would say from my very biased perspective as a social scientist is that the trajectory we seem to be on, though, is primarily a technology first way. And I don't believe from all the different types of fields I've been involved in that that's ever the solution. It's always one part and a very important part of the solution, but it's the people ultimately that will, play the biggest role, right? So it is it's not just about human factors design and things like that, but it's how do you actually first understand where people are at, what people need, what's constraining them from behaving in the way that you want them to behave, in the way that you think is optimal for them, and then tackling those pieces with maybe some technology, maybe some other behavioral, nudge that is needed or maybe just addressing some basic need that someone has in order for them to act in a more sustainable manner. But I think there are those kinds of solutions which don't allow us to talk about it in the billions. It doesn't allow us to talk about scale. It's not sexy and fancy. It's hard work that has to happen at the ground level. And I think, I've been funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for many years, and their technology focus was, just change the way that public health work happened for so long. And then now we've come around again to this thing of, oh, but people. It's not about the technology itself. You can come up with the fanciest possible toilet, but if someone cares more about food security, they are not going to care about the damn toilet, right? So it is just trying to understand that piece. I think that's what will get us there. In terms of just like the call, the charge to all of you out there, I've been working now in the field for 13 years. So I'm a little closer to in terms, in where you are, where I'm in this, like, how do I plug in? Where do I plug in? So what I will say is pick something in your life when it comes to environmental sustainability, if that's what you're interested in, that you feel is a problem and try to tackle that. I'll give you a very personal example right now of, I have a toddler who is refusing to potty train. And as someone who cares so much about plastic waste, every diaper I put on him makes me want to cry because he wants so many in a day. And so my thing for, wanting to tackle ocean plastic pollution, because it's a very personal thing for me, I'm thinking about, yes, I know cloth diapers exist, but doesn't work in conjunction with my priorities of having a full-time job, right? I can't possibly be washing cloth diapers all day. So how can I maybe in my future position now working on plastic pollution, start to get to know and tie into some of these big diaper manufacturers and say, how do you come up with better, less plastic, more recyclable materials for something that people are spending so much money on that's generating so much waste? But at the same time, realizing that for a lot of people, not only are diapers very expensive, they just don't have an alternative. And so how do you start to tackle this? It's a people problem again that requires some technological inputs. So what I mean by that is, like, pick a topic in your own life that matters to you. And you'll find that it's a lifetime's worth of work to get there, right? Because sometimes I think it can get overwhelming for all of us on this call right now who are clearly, wanting to do something important for the planet to try to make things better. It can get overwhelming. And so pick something. And then I think, David and Cristina have talked about collaboration. We're not going to be experts at everything. I know the people thing. I know how to ask people questions. I know how to think about systems, but I don't know anything about the actual manufacturing of stuff. I don't know what it's like to be in the lab. That's okay. I don't know what it means to grow crops. That's okay. But we collaborate, and that's how we actually lead to solutions together. So each of you in this room probably has a really great expertise that you're honing or have already honed that you can bring together. And that's, I think, how we really start to make a difference.
Excellent concluding comments from all three panels. Thank you so much. That was, as Dave said, a very big topic, but go big or go home. And I think we did a great job. Thank you so much. Thanks to all the fellows who had great questions today. Thanks to all of our alumni who have been tuning in. We'll call the panel here because can't top that one, right? We'll be back at 1 p.m. this afternoon. And applause from all the fellows to all of our.
Yeah. Okay, good. Hey, welcome everyone back to SISE. This is our first afternoon of the second week. And we have a very interesting discussion scheduled for now. It's about the land art generator, something you may have heard about, although probably not, I'm going to guess. The goal of the land art generator is to accelerate the transition to post-carbon economies by providing models of renewable energy infrastructure, and here's the kicker, that add value to public space, inspire, and educate, while providing equitable power to homes around the world. Really a unique goal and vision, and I think you'll really enjoy what you hear. Robert Ferry and Elizabeth Monoyan, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, and Elizabeth, maybe you can help us when you get on. Robert, following a decade of design and project management on sustainable new urbanist developments in the United States, spent 4 years as a consultant on large commercial projects in Abu Dhabi, where his focus shifted from ways in which buildings can move beyond net zero to contribute to the energy needs of the surrounding city. So instead of just simply being net zero, let's give. Let's have the buildings give. What an interesting idea. Elizabeth is the founding co-director. She is developing global partnerships that address issues of climate and sustainability through the lens of creativity. She works closely with cities, universities, corporations, arts organizations, and community groups to design customized approaches to renewable energy installations. So what I'm going to do, and Robert and Elizabeth, if you're willing to do this, maybe you could spend a couple of minutes talking about how you dreamed up this wonderful idea. And then, as I understand, you have about half an hour presentation, and then we'll open it to the fellows for questions. So take it away, please.
Thanks, George. And you weren't too far off. It's Minoyan.
Minoyan.
So
got it.
I would say Minoyan. So yeah, this is such a pleasure, and it's nice to see all these faces on Zoom today. My background is through the arts. I have a master's in fine arts from Carnegie Mellon University. And shortly after finishing grad school, I sort of went through this crisis mode. Like, what am I doing? I'm not really interested in being a gallery oriented artist. And I really wanted to bring a conversation about sustainability and activism into my personal approach to art making. So I founded a nonprofit organization that would be the platform to develop the types of projects that interested me. And that nonprofit organization is the umbrella organization that is the Land Art Generator Initiative today. So, you know, this sort of crisis pushed me to start my own venue and platform. And it's been an amazing adventure ever since.
And I'm an architect, and by the time we met, it was right around the time that Elizabeth founded the nonprofit. I had been working for a decade after graduating, and was seeing that a lot of the, you know, LEED standards for building, the conventional construction building industry was very slow to adapt, and it was a lot of making things just a little bit less bad. And I was really ready to innovate something. And so when we moved off to Dubai together after getting married in 2008, we had this opportunity to just shake things up, do something new and different with our life together. It was a real interesting adventure being in the Middle East and working on interesting projects there. We actually sat down together at a place called Après, a bar that overlooks Ski Dubai, if you can imagine that. And we were looking at a grant opportunity that actually never came to pass. In fact, the granting agency never actually came to pass. But this opportunity put us on a path. We started to share ideas across the table as we were sharing a bottle of wine, and we were inspired. You know, we have been to some of the great land art installations in the American Southwest, and Storm King and Dia, Beacon, and you know, that kind of art making in natural settings, and the conversation between art and nature, something that's really important to both of us, always has been. We were inspired coming to the UAE to find that there were Emirati artists working in the genre of land art through the Flying House Gallery. They had studied with some of the folks in England who were doing that kind of work. And of course, the great ambitious development going on in the UAE, the access to solar resources, particularly the idea of designing new renewable energy landscapes as cultural destinations, as works of art and public space, as beautiful places that could inspire the world about the beauty of a world beyond carbon. That got us thinking about, well, what if we opened a design competition to challenge the world around this idea? And that's become our life.
And that conversation really was one evening, bottle of wine, came out of it with a manifesto that is what the Land Art Generator Initiative has become over the last decade. So it's a fun journey, and we're going to take you on that journey over the next 30 minutes. We're going to share our screen, pull up a file. And I'm going to ask if you're able to see this file.
We are.
So what we're going to do, though, is start by giving some historic context, cultural context of why we're doing what we're doing at the Land Art Generator Initiative. And then we'll weave back in some of the narrative of our origin story and then take you through what those outcomes are.